In the heart of Dubai, where wealth and power are woven into the very fabric of the city, a simple gesture from the government giving gold coins to a select few servants set off an unexpected and dangerous chain of events. What was meant to be a token of appreciation soon became a catalyst for division, jealousy, and betrayal. The recipients of the coins, once humble servants, found themselves at the center of a bitter rivalry that threatened to unravel the very core of the government's inner workings. As suspicion grew and alliances shifted, a question lingered: could something as simple as a gold coin shatter loyalty and trust forever? In a city like Dubai, where luxury and wealth are a daily sight, the government's decision to give gold coins to its servants seemed like nothing more than a well-deserved gesture of appreciation. The servants were a quiet yet essential part of the government's operations, handling everything from logistics and communication to administrative tasks that kept the city's vast machinery running smoothly. These individuals, often overlooked by the public, worked diligently behind the scenes, far from the spotlight of the city's many towering skyscrapers and glittering malls. At first glance, the gift of the gold coins appeared to be a generous acknowledgement of their loyalty and hard work. It wasn't an uncommon practice for the government to reward its employees, but this particular gesture stood out. The coins were no ordinary trinkets. They were solid gold, engraved with the intricate symbols of the nation's history and values. Each coin was heavy with significance, both in terms of its material worth and the recognition it represented. It was a token that seemed to promise more than just financial value. It was a symbol of honor, trust, and appreciation. The announcement was made in the early days of the year, and initially the response was one of gratitude and excitement. Those chosen to receive the coins were filled with pride, and their colleagues congratulated them, assuming that the gesture was simply a well-earned reward for years of diligent service. For many, it was a dream come true to receive such an esteemed gift, one that they had never expected. But as the coins were distributed, the atmosphere in the government's inner circle began to change. What had been meant as an act of recognition quickly started to sow the seeds of division. The servants who had received the gold coins began to wear them proudly, as though the coins marked them as the most valuable members of the government workforce. They would subtly display the coins in meetings or conversations, letting others know that they had been honored with this prestigious reward. What was initially a simple acknowledgement soon became a source of silent pride, and perhaps even arrogance. The servants who did not receive the gold coins were left to wonder why they had been overlooked. The reasons behind the decision were unclear, and that lack of transparency only fueled their feelings of resentment. Why had some been chosen while others, who had worked just as hard, were left out? The recipients of the gold coin seemed to hold an unspoken power over their peers, and it didn't take long for the others to notice. As the days passed, whispers began to spread among the servants. Some believed that the gold coins were awarded based on seniority, while others speculated that only those who had connections with the higher-ups had been chosen. There were even rumors that the gold coins had been handed out as part of a political maneuver, to reward those who had proven themselves loyal to certain factions within the government. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a growing sense of divide. For those who had not received the gold coins, the feeling of exclusion became unbearable. They had long prided themselves on their loyalty and service, but now it seemed as though their efforts had been overlooked. They began to question their place in the hierarchy of the government. Had they not worked hard enough? Were they not important enough to be noticed? What did the coins truly represent? And why had they been left out? The growing resentment among those who had been excluded festered in silence, as they observed the privileged few flaunting their newfound status. The recipients of the coins, on the other hand, began to grow more and more distant from their colleagues. They might have started out humble, but the recognition that came with the gold coins soon changed their behavior. They were no longer just servants, they were the chosen few, a select group who had earned the government's most prestigious reward. This shift in attitude created an invisible barrier between the two groups. The coin holders began to bond more closely with one another, forming unspoken alliances based on their shared experience. They became a group unto themselves, their connections growing stronger as they navigated the increasingly tense environment. Meanwhile, the servants who had been left out began to feel more isolated. They watched as those who had received the coins were given more opportunities, more respect, and more influence, while they remained on the sidelines, wondering what they had done wrong. As the weeks went by, the rivalry between the two groups intensified. The ones who had been left out began to speak in hushed tones about the injustice of the situation. It wasn't just about the coins anymore, it was about respect, recognition, and a feeling of being valued. They began to question the integrity of the government's decision-making process. Was this truly about rewarding loyalty, or was there something more insidious at play? Why had some received this honor, and not others? Behind closed doors, some began to form secret plans. The ones who had been overlooked wanted to prove that they were just as deserving of recognition, and they began to scheme in ways that they had never considered before. The coins, once a symbol of pride, now became a source of frustration. They were a constant reminder of the inequality that had surfaced, and each passing day only deepened the divisions between the two groups. The recipients of the coins, meanwhile, were not immune to the pressure that came with their new status. Though they had been honored with the gift, they soon realized that their place at the top was precarious. As their peers began to grow resentful, the ones who had received the coins started to feel a sense of unease. What had started as a simple reward now felt more like a burden. They began to fear the jealousy and animosity that simmered just beneath the surface, and they knew that their positions were far from secure. The more they flaunted their coins, the more they alienated themselves from those around them. The quiet, underlying tension reached its peak one evening during a routine government event. The servants gathered to discuss matters of logistics and administration, but what was supposed to be a normal meeting quickly descended into chaos. Those who had not received the gold coins openly expressed their frustration, accusing their colleagues of being part of a scheme designed to elevate a select few while leaving the rest behind. The accusations were sharp, and the words cut deep. At that moment, the realization hit everyone present. The gold coins had done more than reward loyalty, they had exposed something far darker. The divisions between the servants, once subtle and unspoken, had now erupted into open conflict. Those who had been left out felt betrayed, and those who had received the coins began to question whether the honor was worth the cost. What had started as a simple gesture of recognition had unwittingly sparked a battle for power, influence, and respect that no one had seen coming. The government had intended for the gold coins to bring honor to its servants, but instead, they had ignited a firestorm of rivalry, distrust, and suspicion. The truth was that the coins had revealed something deeper about the nature of power in the city. It wasn't just about the gold, it was about who held the keys to the city's inner workings, who had the power to shape the future, and who was left behind in the shadows. The rivalry between the servants was only the beginning of a much larger, more complex story that would unfold in the weeks to come. And as the tension between the servants grew, the question remained, what would happen when everyone realized that the gold coins were not just a gift, but a weapon that could destroy everything in its path? As the days passed after the initial, it was clear now that the gold coins, intended as a symbol of honor, had instead become a powerful symbol of division, stirring up emotions that would not be easily contained. The rivalry between the servants had just begun, and with each passing day, the atmosphere grew more tense, more charged with suspicion and distrust. As the rivalry between the two factions of servants deepened, the once smooth operations of the government began to falter. The quiet efficiency of daily tasks was disrupted by the growing tension, as the servants' focus shifted from their work to the increasingly bitter divide between them. The servants who had received the gold coins began to isolate themselves more, gravitating towards one another in groups, forming alliances that were not only based on shared privilege but also on shared fears. They knew that their position, once secure, was now precarious. Those who had been excluded from the reward had begun to take their frustration to new levels, and the risk of confrontation loomed larger with every passing day. Meanwhile, those who had not received the gold coins became more organized in their resistance. What started as casual conversations about their grievances soon turned into strategic planning sessions. They were no longer content with simply lamenting their exclusion. They began to devise ways to challenge the authority of the chosen ones and question the fairness of the distribution process. Some began to gather information, hoping to uncover any hidden agendas or motives behind the decisions. They talked of speaking out publicly, of petitioning for a redistribution of the coins, or even taking matters into their own hands if the government refused to address the growing unrest. The tension reached a boiling point when one of the servants who had been left out of the coin distribution organized a clandestine meeting. At this gathering, emotions ran high as many of the excluded servants vented their frustration. They no longer felt as though they were part of the same team. They saw themselves as victims of an unjust system, one that had created a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots. Some even suggested that the gold coin recipients should be held accountable for their newfound status, accusing them of using their position to gain favor and manipulate their colleagues. The accusations were harsh, and the distrust between the two groups only grew. In response, the servants who had received the gold coins were forced to confront the growing animosity. They had never expected their reward to come with such consequences, but now they found themselves on the defensive. Some began to question whether they had been too eager to display their newfound status, and whether their actions had inadvertently fueled the fire of resentment. However, others remained defiant, convinced that their loyalty and dedication to the government had earned them their reward. The divide between the two factions was now more than just ideological, it had become personal. There were whispers of sabotage, of quiet betrayals, and of secret alliances forming in every corner of the government. As the situation escalated, the leadership of the government found themselves in an uncomfortable position. The unrest among the servants was undeniable, and it was clear that if something wasn't done soon, the situation could spiral out of control. Yet the leadership was divided themselves. Some believed that the gold coins had been a mistake, that they had only served to highlight the inequalities within the workforce. Others, however, felt that the rewards had been given for a reason, and that any attempt to undo them would be seen as weakness. The government's inability to make a decision only added fuel to the fire. The servants, both those who had received the coins and those who had not, grew more impatient by the day. The atmosphere became increasingly hostile, and the sense of betrayal was palpable. It was only a matter of time before something would have to give. The first major confrontation came when a group of servants who had not received the gold coins attempted to stage a protest. They marched through the government halls, demanding to be heard and questioning the motives behind the reward system. Their voices were loud and angry, and their message was clear. The system was broken, and it needed to be fixed. The protest quickly gained momentum as more servants joined in. Those who had received the coins, though initially caught off guard, soon found themselves surrounded by a sea of angry colleagues. The once unspoken division between the two factions now erupted into the open, with accusations flying in all directions. Some servants who had received the coins tried to defend themselves, insisting that they had done nothing wrong, but their words were drowned out by the chants of those who felt excluded. It was at this point that the leadership of the government was forced to step in. The protesters, now a large and vocal group, were demanding answers, and the tension had reached a point where it seemed that the situation could escalate into something far more dangerous. The government called for an emergency meeting to address the crisis, but no one was prepared for what would happen next. The leadership, divided and uncertain, began to issue conflicting statements, trying to calm the situation while still maintaining their authority. The servants, however, were no longer listening to the leadership. They were more interested in getting to the truth. Why had some been chosen for the gold coins and not others? Why had they been left out of the recognition? And what did it say about their value within the government? As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the government had underestimated the power of the division among the servants. The once harmonious workforce was now a fractured group, with trust between colleagues shattered beyond repair. Some of the coin holders began to feel the weight of their reward more than they had ever imagined, realizing that the prize they had once worn proudly now made them a target for suspicion and resentment. The protest continued to gain momentum, and with it, the possibility of violence became more real. The leadership had failed to contain the situation, and the tension between the two factions reached a dangerous tipping point. The once quiet government hallways were now filled with angry voices, and the threat of a larger, more destructive conflict loomed over everyone. The final chapter of the story was one of reckoning. The protests had grown into something much larger than anyone had anticipated, and the government could no longer ignore the unrest that had taken root. The leadership, realizing that they could no longer control the situation, called for a public address to resolve the matter once and for all. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. The leadership declared that the gold coins would be confiscated, and a new system of rewards would be established, one that would be more transparent and fair, ensuring that no one would be left out or made to feel inferior. The government promised that all servants, regardless of their status, would be treated equally and that steps would be taken to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. However, the damage was already done. The servants who had once worked together in harmony were now divided beyond repair. The recipients of the gold coins, though technically stripped of their reward, now faced a different challenge. The sense of betrayal and resentment from their peers would not easily be forgotten. The ones who had been left out of the distribution of coins, though granted some form of justice, were now left with a sense of bitter victory. Their fight had been won, but at what cost? The government's efforts to restore balance were seen as too little, too late. The divide between the servants had become a permanent scar, and the once unified workforce was now fractured beyond repair. In the end, the gold coins, intended to bring recognition and honor, had only served to expose the fragile nature of loyalty and the dangerous power of perceived privilege. As the dust settled, it became clear that the gold coins had not only disrupted the lives of the servants, but had also revealed the deeper flaws within the government itself. The once harmonious structure of power was forever altered, and the events set in motion by a simple act of reward would resonate for years to come.